Yeah, I think we are live now.
Yep, that's what it says.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome you all. We are glad you are here for our webinar on supply chain sustainability and circularity. My name is Sushma Best. I am a support officer of ASCI. Today, we will learn about few points like understanding sustainability in supply chains, exploring circular supply chains, the role of supply chain in achieving overall sustainability, tools to implement circular supply chains. Our expert speaker, Dennis Staff, is here to help you succeed. Please ask questions and share your own experiences. Before we begin, let's review a few house rules to ensure everyone has a positive and productive experience. If you have any questions or comments, please use the chat feature or Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window. Also, please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and we will upload the recording to our YouTube channel after the webinar. We appreciate your cooperation and hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now I will hand it over to Dennis to start. Thank you, Dennis. Over to you now.
Thank you so much for having me. And hello to everyone. My name is Denise Staff. I am a sustainability expert who specializes in working with manufacturers and supply chains. The tools and the methods that we will discuss in this webinar are part of a masterclass that, so we will have parts of it that we will go through in depth, and we may skip over a few areas depending on time. But there are some tools and processes here that you're going to find unique. And why you're going to find them unique is because my background was sustainability first, supply chain second. A lot of times people were supply chain first and sustainability second. So when they learned sustainability, they always tried to incorporate it into supply chains. I, on the other hand, when I saw my clients and their supply chains, I only originally thought of it from a sustainability perspective. So I see it very differently than some people do who are working in the supply chain industry. And this is why I feel that this is a unique perspective, and it will give you tools and ways to think of things a little differently than maybe you had thought of before. So let's get started. And I will stop at a couple of points and look for questions. So if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A and I will make sure to stop and address them. So, all right. First thing we're going to talk about is creating circularity. So what is circularity? What do you need to consider? What are the principles? Because circularity is something that you hear over and over and over again. And you're going to hear two types of words used on every slide: sustainability and circularity. So when you think of sustainability, sustainability is very efficient. It's saving energy, it's saving resources. Sustainability is a lot about inputs and making things more efficient. When we talk about circularity, we're looking for that circle, which you will see in diagrams. And with that comes the idea of eliminating the very linear flow of waste. So circularity has a lot to do with outputs and finding new uses, which we will talk about. So when I talk about sustainability and circularity in supply chains, I say shoot for the moon, shoot for circularity, and at best, you will be a very sustainable organization. So five main reasons for promoting circularity principles of the circular economy would be waste minimization. You always want to minimize waste. Every time you buy a resource, you buy energy, you buy packaging, you're literally wasting. You've got waste in there. So you definitely want resource efficiency. You want economic opportunities because the way of the future is the circular economy. You want to build resilience into your supply chain. By eliminating waste, you are automatically building in resilience. And you want to reduce carbon emissions with regulations and all of the types of laws and mandates put in place. Reducing carbon emissions is paramount for manufacturers and supply chains that feed into manufacturers. So the circular economy is an economic system aimed at eliminating waste, continually using resources instead of using virgin resources, creating jobs for repair, refurbishment, replacement, and recycling for that very closed loop system. Waste minimalization and resource efficiency is the cornerstone of circularity. So I always say this, if you don't use it in the first place and waste it, then you don't have to find something to do with it at the end. So if you are incredibly efficient in your processes and you don't have a lot of packaging waste, then you don't have to recycle it or reuse it or find something to do with it because it doesn't exist in the process. So we want to become efficient so that we're not using virgin resources, but we're also making our job easier by not having to deal with something. So this minimalization really focuses on reuse, repair, and refurbishment. The economic opportunity and resiliency comes within those processes as well. So recycling, remanufacturing, renewable energy. So all of those models are making society more resilient by reducing the dependence on scarce resources. It's also making your supply chains more resilient because if you are sourcing more locally, maybe you don't have issues with a country that you're sourcing something from and the government being corrupt or something. So when you're minimizing waste and minimizing fuel use and minimizing packaging or redesigning your product for non-virgin materials, you're actually making things more resilient because you are in fact understanding those inputs and making them as efficient as possible. Reducing carbon emissions is, everyone knows what that means, but we are definitely, that is the way of the future, is to make your carbon footprint as low as possible. So in the circular economy, we are, your carbon footprint is resource depletion. So the more energy you're using, the more you're depleting, but also the higher your carbon footprint. So when we're looking at the upcoming slides in this presentation and we're thinking about products, we want to think about the stages that all of this needs to go into. So we've got raw material, and you always see circular, and I've got a really funny diagram later that the way circular really looks, despite the way that you may think it. But you've got your raw materials, and then you're designing and you're manufacturing and distributing and consuming and repairing, and you've got collection of recycling and waste, and this all is going around, and what you're trying to do is maximize its use and minimize its waste. So why should you even care about all of this? Well, this is obviously, as I've said, where regulation and where stakeholders in general are going. So if you've got customers, their desire for sustainable products is increasing. And as business, becoming more circular, becoming more efficient, using less is actually increasing your competitiveness. And it's also making you more profitable. So businesses and consumers actually have a merging, and that merging is sustainability and circularity in products that are being manufactured and sold. So that linear model of, extraction, production, consumption, and then just waste is falling out of favor with consumers, especially younger consumers. So I briefly touched on this, but why go for circularity? Why not just say, you know what, we're going to work on sustainability, forget circularity. We're just very happy with our little piece that we want to work on. I caution you because as technology increases and everyone is just leapfrogging year after year ahead, they're moving towards circularity. They're moving towards net zero targets, although I don't like net zero targets in the way that people are currently doing them. But circularity is shooting for the moon and at least ending up somewhere very close to it, as opposed to staying down and saying, you know what, I think we're going to do a little bit of sustainability and dip our toe in the water and see what's going on. So circularity is the merging of three things. It's increasing your bottom line by lowering costs. That's the easiest way. The more circular you can make your organization, the lower costs from waste. It's reducing risk, as I stated. When you're, first of all, when you're examining your supply chain to the level that we will talk about, you're going to understand areas of risk more than maybe you ever have. And it's an opportunity for brand strengthening. Consumers are increasingly demanding this kind of transparency. And that's kind of why carbon footprinting, I think, has taken off. It's almost like the nutritional label on your food. You automatically might look to see how much fat or sugar or salt. It's going to be automatic that consumer products or products in general have a carbon footprint that you get to make a decision by, right? So what kind of processes are involved in moving towards circularity? You are removing the consumption of finite materials, and you are designing out of the processes waste. And we'll talk a lot about that, designing it out. You're keeping materials and products in use, and you are contributing to the natural systems by not depleting them. So a lot of people can tell you what this is. They can tell you, what circularity is and what it means in a supply chain. But the key is how. How do you get here? What do you do? How do you learn how to make the right decisions? And so that's what we're going to kind of focus on tonight or today. It's today for you guys. And that is, how do we create that efficiency to eliminate the waste, to find the sourcing, to create the systems, to calculate and track so that we are somewhere on this wheel coming up with our strategy. And that's what we're going to talk about. So we're going to go over some tools that you can use today to start your journey. And maybe all of them won't work for you, and maybe some of them will work for you, and maybe you're not ready for all of them, but it's about exploring those opportunities. Okay. So first thing we're going to talk about is life cycle thinking. Some people may have heard of life cycle analysis or EPDs or, life cycles in general. But life cycle thinking is the precursor to all of that. And it's about taking that 10,000 foot view, so sorry, over your processes and examining them. So you're going to start with, I always start this way because this is the way I think of it for a manufacturer or someone who is, in that industry, in an industry, is I start in their shoes. So obviously, you've got your upstream and your downstream, but you're going to take up the view from the manufacturer. If you're in distribution, you can take it from that as well, because you're still going to have, a right and a left and an upstream and a downstream, but you're going to start there. You don't start at the end, in my mind, at least. And we're going to start with manufacturing. So in manufacturing, we're going to take a deep dive into that. But at first, you're going to want to look and say, okay, as the manufacturer, who are my raw material suppliers? How are they coming to me? What am I getting them? And of those raw material suppliers, you may have to go back further. So if you have a wood product, and you're buying board feet of lumber, for instance, then you would have the extractor, the logging company. If you are buying limestone, from someone who processes it, you may have a mine. So your raw material supplier may sometimes be tier one, but sometimes they have a tier one, and that would be your tier two, obviously. And so this is how we're going to move back. But we're going to start examining this and asking questions. So the key here would be to ask questions. So as the manufacturer, I'm going to go back to my raw material suppliers. That's the closest, my tier one. And I'm going to say, how do these materials get to me? Where do they come from? Do they have suppliers? And what is happening? How, are they all coming to me in one shipment? Do we get a shipment every week? We're starting to look at how things are moving. And so with the raw material supplier, are they warehoused and then moved to you? Is it on demand, or is it demand planning? Like, how are those things coming to you? And then how are their suppliers coming to them? And then from you, your point of view, we're going to examine your production and how things move through your production and how things are designed. And do you have a warehouse, or is it all done on a manufacturing floor? And, we're just going to keep going. Now we're going to go to this way. Now, what I like to say about the upstream is that these are things that you can control directly or indirectly. You control who you buy from, you control where they are for the most part. And maybe indirectly, you control where their suppliers come from if you've got some procurement policies. But when we start moving into distribution and consumption and disposal, you are now relying on consumer behavior to drive what happens. My least favorite part to work with, I would say, is the consumption phase, because I feel like that is out of scope for what we're trying to do in the majority of our decisions. And I always say that, people in a glass house shouldn't throw stones, meaning if I don't have my house in order and I've got tons of waste and I'm not efficient in my manufacturing practices and I don't have sustainable procurement and I've got all of these issues, who am I to tell my consumer that this is how you need to behave? I'll give an example: fast fashion. Fast fashion has deplorable supply chain issues, many of them brought on by their own sticking their head in the sand. But then they're preaching to consumers that this is what you need to do. And I say, be Patagonia. So Patagonia is a US manufacturer. I don't know if they are in Australia, but they are all about sustainability and circularity, and their consumers care about that. But they also, I feel like Patagonia can preach to me what to do with their stuff because they've got their own house in order. So I would listen to them. Somebody who has less scrupulous behavior in their supply chain by turning the other way, not because they are not they are condoning it, they're just allowing it by simply not paying attention. So I don't cover consumption and disposal very much in this because I feel like there are tons of decisions that need to be made in this aspect of supply chain, and not to go into the further downstream. Okay, so when we look at a product life cycle, this is what we're drawing out. This is what we start thinking about. And these are the different steps. So procurement plays a huge role in sustainability and circularity, a huge role actually, because once we set the targets, they're going to help in their policies, in their screening of suppliers, make sure that they are upholding those targets. So that's going to be a big thing that we're going to talk about. But you can see, and it's not always truck transport. It could be a rail, it could be ship, but you see how we have to consider each one of the stages in that entire product life cycle. So the chain of supplies, same thing. We're going through and we are looking at each stage individually and asking questions and drawing it out. And the potential creators of the supply chain, as I said, is it customer demand? Is it demand planning? That's going to play a big role. A big thing that people do not say in sustainability is proper demand planning could either make or break your sustainability system if you work on demand planning, because the wrong demand planning, if you are making too much, that's using everything. That's using energy, that's using resources. That's bad on all levels. So that is one, we don't cover it in this course, but that is a huge initiator of sustainability, is proper demand planning. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't talk about. And so in the life cycle thinking, we will cover as well recycling, post-industrial, post-consumer. What do all of these mean? Well, if you're post-industrial, that means you are scraps from manufacturing that did not make it to the consumer. For instance, you make metal piping. And your cutoffs, you then sell back to a factory that melts it down. That would be post-industrial. Post-consumer would be my water bottle. I recycle it, it goes back into the stream. And so it's either called, that's called post-consumer. Post-industrial can also be called pre-consumer. Sometimes it's called that instead, but that is the way to think about it. So life cycle thinking is process-based thinking. So we're going to examine each step of processes. It's a mindset shift. So when we looked at those diagrams, it's not raw material being trucked to a manufacturer. That's not what we're going to see when we go. It's standing on the floor, and we're going to talk about that. It's materials loaded into a non-recyclable bin by a tow motor using propane as fuel. That bin is then trucked to a manufacturing location 2,000 miles away. There's a 2% loss of material as a result of handling. It's unloaded at the manufacturing site with equipment powered by electricity and dumped into a silo, and the packaging is discarded as waste. Do you see the difference? So when we start looking at the processes, we are almost breaking it down to the lowest possible unit, as opposed to keeping it very high level. The raw material is trucked to the manufacturer in this process. But is it really? Because if I were to stand, levitate in the air and watch this as it happens, I would see number two. I would be able to see every single step. everything that touches it. Because in the first step, what do I see? I see fuel being used by a truck. That's all I see. But in the second step, I see fuel by the truck, propane by the tow motor. I see the loss of material in the handling, and I see the packaging as waste. So I'm breaking it down so that I can see all these individual pieces because I have to do something with those. I have to make them more efficient. I've got to find a use for that packaging. So I need to be able to see it. And we're going to talk about seeing it on paper. So the rules about process is everything can be broken down to a process, and it can be broken down to a minute step. Everything is connected to everything else. And prevention and elimination is more effective than efficiency of control. I mentioned this earlier. Having packaging waste, if I eliminate it at the source, and we'll talk about how to do that, it's much better than figuring out what to do with it once I have it. So prevention is better than elimination of control. And focus on what you can control first. As I said, I don't really cover consumer behavior because I can't control that. If people want to go on TikTok and make 10,000 videos about Zara and Shein and H&M clothes that they're wearing, I can't control that. But what I can control is the fabrics, where they're coming from, what they're being made of, how those suppliers are working. Those are the things I can control. So the first thing we're going to talk about is creating efficiency-based targets. Those are the easiest, and they give a payback. So if you are selling somebody in your organization on what to do for sustainability or circularity, whatever you want to call it, you're going to set efficiency targets first. They're quite easy. So you're going to look through the entire view, take your view, and find where you can do that. So we're going to focus on the operational control, where you can make a direct impact. We're going to focus on areas you can control directly, where your decisions count. And then we'll talk the second part, we'll talk about operations. So how are we going to get this perspective? What's the first thing we're going to do? We're going to draw it out. We're going to understand our inputs, and we're going to find our outputs. In the inputs are sustainable supply chain practices. In the outputs, those are going to be your circularity principles. Okay. And this is what we're going to come up with. So let's you can do this for a product, like a keystone product. I would call a keystone product a main seller if you have lots of products, or I would do a group of products. You can do a group of products this way, maybe all by the same supplier, or maybe all in the same product category. You can do this for an entire product category. It'll be a little less specific and a little more complicated, but you can do it. So what does this whole diagram say? So we're going to use something easy that I knew the supply chain pretty basic off the top of my head. And this is a carpet tile. So, back in the 70s and 80s, broad loom carpet, where you walked into a room and it was all carpeted, was all the rage. And then in the early 2000s, they started making the carpet tiles, where they are, squares that you put down, and you could always lift one up and take one out if it got ruined or whatever. And so a carpet tile is what we're looking at, is one of those squares. And so we're the manufacturer, and we have three major inputs. One would be limestone, one would be the polypropylene yarn, and then we've got binders and polymers. So this is our very basic supply chain for just illustration purposes. So what the first thing we want to do is we want to say, okay, limestone. What is the inputs to limestone? Water and energy. Okay. What are the outputs? Wastewater, energy emissions, and waste in general. Just the dynamite sticks that you blew up the rock with. There you go. That's, that's waste. So we're going to have inputs of water and energy, and we're going to have outputs of wastewater emissions and good old waste of all kinds. And that limestone is then trucked, which has emissions, to a manufacturer. So polypropylene yarn or nylon yarn that you would use in the carpet tile, well, it doesn't originate a lot of times at the supplier. The supplier has to buy the raw materials to spin or extrude that polypropylene or nylon yarn. So they've got suppliers, so they've got raw material inputs that are trucked to them. And in their yarn from there, they're going to have energy and they're going to have packaging because those raw materials came somehow. And so as the output, you're going to have waste packaging, you're going to have emissions, and you'll have waste product or parts of how you're manufacturing, okay? And it's trucked with emissions to the manufacturer. Next, you're going to have your input is packaging as well, because you've got to package all of this to send it on to the manufacturer. So you've got an input of packaging as well. Same thing with the binders and polymers, same scenario. So now when you go to the manufacturer, you've got water and energy, and you've got outputs of waste packaging, waste water emissions, and waste from the manufacturing processes. And you go on to the distributor, and how are you trucking it to the distributor? And then you go on to the retailers, and how are they getting it and what's happening there? And then on to the customers, and then final disposal. Okay. So if I were to sketch this out, when I sketch it out, it doesn't look this nice. But this is a little bit of how I would do it. And I would have my inputs and my outputs so that I can understand where things are happening. Now, if I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say, I have an output of packaging waste. So all of these materials, that's not going to have packaging, but these two will have packaging when they come in. And when that packaging comes in, I've now become the dumping ground for all of their waste packaging. And they've now wasted money, maybe on excess packaging that I'm going to throw away. And when I say throw away, it could be landfilled, it could be recycled. There are many things that could happen to it, but all of them are saying that they are not retaining their value in, recycling is pennies for what they cost to make it. So when I'm looking at these pictures, I'm thinking efficiency. I want to source materials that save fossil fuels, which avoid cost and emissions. I want to save virgin resources, which avoids waste and reduces impact. And I want to save everything associated with it. As I said before, demand planning saves everything, because if you make too much and you can't sell it, it just becomes waste. And that's a waste of everything. And then I want to be more operationally efficient, because that's going to save energy and water mainly. So when I start looking at this and I say, okay, I now get a little picture of what we are and what we're getting. And as I said, this could be groups of products. This could be a lot of different things. We're going to start asking questions, because we're starting to think, okay, so if we bought things more domestically or closer, that would save fossil fuel, and the price of diesel obviously changes, and it's very volatile at times. Can we buy more than one item from a supplier? Would we save not only energy, but would we save maybe not in the first order, but over time with shipping or other ways that if we bought multiple items from the same supplier that maybe we currently don't buy? Can we source materials with a greater recycled content that would save resources? How can we reduce energy in manufacturing? And is our demand planning correct? So the first thing you would do is when you look at your model, you're going to just start jotting down almost like a little brain dump of what you think. Just by this portion, by looking at this inputs, this outputs, and what is what you've drawn out. Just going to do a little brain dump of your initial thoughts. And maybe none of them are anything that you use later, but they're at least things that you start thinking as you're asking questions. Because the number one thing that I see in manufacturers who are doing carbon footprinting is that they have to start asking questions that maybe they never asked before. Actually, usually they haven't. And it's that asking the questions. Well, we'll ask a question. They'll say, we don't know. I'll say, well, can you ask the supplier? They're like, ask the supplier. What a good idea. And so these kinds of thoughts will start spurring questions. Why do we do it this way? A lot of times you're going to get the answer because that's where we've always done it. And so you're going to start in that when you're looking and you're asking questions in the purchasing. So you've got the need, you've got the specification, you've got the sourcing. So you're going to start looking at that and just asking questions. Is this how we do this? Is this why we do this? You know, what needs to go on? And then you can start looking around. You want suppliers with more recycled content in their materials. You start looking around and you start, asking questions. And then you can start looking at where you can get advantages. So can you get a cost reduction? Can you get a cost improvement? Can you get reduced cycle times? Can you get better technology? Can you get improved quality? What else can go along with this as you're asking the questions? You know, maybe a supplier says, nobody ever asked us that before. And so, yeah, of course we have that. We have this feature plus this feature. And you say, oh, wow, that second feature is really something we're interested in. So it's the asking of the questions that's creating the sustainable procurement, but it's all coming from the original drawing out. Now I'm going to stop for a second, ask a few questions, and I'm going to skip through some slides because I want to cover something else. So we're going to skip through some procurement. But any questions at this time? All right. So when you're creating those efficiency targets, you are essentially doing three things. You're increasing your sustainability, ESG, circularity. You're reducing risk in your organization, and you're saving money. So whatever you want to call it, maybe your organization is big on reducing risk and you're like, I can sell this idea if it reduces risk, or I can sell this as a money saving idea, or I can sell this, we're big on increasing our sustainability. So all three of these go hand in hand with those types of questions that you're asking. So logistics is another key piece of it, and we are going to talk quickly about a few things on this. This is part of a bigger presentation, a masterclass. So I'm going to skip through some things as well to cover a few more topics. But this is something that we'll just go through and get some key points on, because I want you guys to have a couple of tools. And the first tool is the life cycle thinking. And then I want you to have one more tool at least. So we will cover it here shortly. So point source emissions versus mobile emissions. So obviously point source emissions are from your factory. They're from stationary sources, and mobile emissions are from a car or a truck or, something that's mobile. The advantages of trying to capture and eliminate mobile emissions, they're flexible in the targeting. We can create targets and reductions a lot of times easier in fleet management and changing of practices. So you've got that flexibility, and its proximity is closer to communities, which is why it's really important, because it's the ground level air that people breathe. From a circularity perspective, when you're looking at emissions and footprints, you're going to want to obviously control, you're going to want to eliminate, but you're going to look at measures that you can use to do that very easily and quickly. And that would be 1, behavior changes, and 2, planning. A lot of my clients, an easy way to reduce a carbon footprint for their products, at least a little bit, is by switching from freight truck to rail. So when you are doing a life cycle analysis, a full carbon footprint, rail is about 10 times more efficient than truck transport, and ship is about 100 times more efficient than truck transport. So you get like the factor of 10, and that's a rough estimate, but you are going to want to reduce risk by making behavior changes or planning in the logistics, because it's going to be able to give you that cost savings, right? That reduction. So how would you do that? Optimize route planning, modal shifts, collaborative transportation, vehicle fleet optimization, packaging. So green logistics focuses on removing the environmental impact of transportation on supply chain activities. So these are the types of ways in which you can do that. And I say that it's easier on mobile emissions because when we're going to get here in a minute to point source emissions and the factory, sometimes that involves changing equipment and, much bigger capital investments than better fleet management. And electricity prices, although they do go up over time, they're not nearly as volatile as diesel prices. So I really think that fleet optimization is something that all supply chain professionals should be looking at in their organization for sustainability and circularity. 2 things that I think are very, very overlooked. I mentioned 1 being demand planning, and 2nd being fleet optimization. I think those are 2 very good places to start when you are on your journey, because you're going to see a very quick payback on that. If you don't mind, I'm going to switch to I don't want to talk about avoided emissions right now. I'm going to switch really quickly to emissions reporting. So no, I don't want to switch there. Sorry. All right, we're going to go here. We're going to go back to this diagram because this is where I want to keep going. So a waste elimination for circularity is decision-based. Okay. So efficiency was the beginning where we were saying, okay, we are going to have less transport. We're going to be better with our resources. Now we need to do waste elimination. That's going to be the second part of it. So the first part of it is the very, very low hanging fruit of the efficiency, water efficiency, energy efficiency, fuel efficiency, that kind of elimination. Now we're going to talk about decision-based and design-based elimination. And that comes from looking at your map that we were making and asking these types of questions. How do we change the product so that its packaging can be less, have different raw materials? What if your packaging is non-recyclable? And you definitely want to find different raw materials. How do you eliminate what's unnecessary to begin with? I had a customer one time who 12% of their carbon footprint came from packaging. 12%. It's normally less than 2%. And I said to them, what are you doing with all this packaging? Like, you are overkilling it. And to the 10th degree, I've never seen so much packaging. And so we had a meeting, and pretty much anybody who was interested got to come, and secretary came, and it just, from the CEO to the secretary to the dock manager to people on the floor, manufacturing floor. And we said, what is going on? And they said, well, we've just always done it this way. Okay, do we have to do it this way? And somebody said in the back, wait a minute, but we didn't always do it this way. Well, why did we change? Oh, we don't know. That happened years ago. We don't even know the people that really worked here back then. Maybe a few people did, but majority didn't. And so these are the kinds of things over time happen. And now it's ballooned into, maybe they got like 4 complaints of broken goods, and it's ballooned into this 12% impact. There were a lot of other features that played into that, but that's an example that you just start asking the questions. Well, why is it? I don't know. Ask about the suppliers. Work with the suppliers to optimize their packaging. Because again, their packaging, the packaging input here in the polypropylene yarn ends up over here, if you can see my cursor, as your waste. So if I want to eliminate the waste here in my recycling bin, I have to go back to here to find it. This is why drawing it out makes sense. If I want to deal with an output, I need to find its input. And this guy's output is way over here. Does that make sense? So this helps you to go through your, you can literally, there's waste tracking where you can literally go through your dumpsters and figure out where the packaging is coming from and go back to those suppliers and say, do something. Either you take it back and recycle it, or you do something. So another thing about circularity that is not talked about enough is hazardous substances. Hazardous substances are the enemy of circularity because it makes handling them difficult and recycling or reusing them almost impossible. So you don't want to have any hazardous substances in anything if you can get away with it, because that means that the buck stops there. Once there's something hazardous in it, that's it. So you have operational changes through efficiency targets, but you've got procurement and sourcing changes based on your decision-based targets, right? That's where those kinds of, they're going to be operational in what you do with them, but finding them is going to require going back to the source. And that's where you start. So always, 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 if you get nothing from today, prevention and elimination is more effective than efficiency and control. Okay. So as I said, if you have your packaging waste at the manufacturing, you've got to go find its input and work with that supplier to change that input. So another big point that I want to drive home on this is that recycling is not the answer. If everything on your output is recycling, you get a D minus. I don't know if your grades are A, B, C, D, F, but in the US, F is fail, D is failing, C is okay. Okay, we'll give you a C minus maybe. If all your outputs are recycled, because that is one step above landfilling, literally. Why? Because you need logistics. You need to reprocess it. You need to do something with it. And it's not, you need to change it in some way. So that's more energy, that's more truck transport. You're just adding that on top, where redesigning it, reducing it, reusing it, recovering it are much better options than recycling it. So again, I'll give you a C minus if all your outputs are recycled and not eliminated completely, or at least reused in some way. I talked about how hazardous waste. Repurpose or recycling. So this is an example of local drugstore chains in our area don't ship in boxes to their retail stores. They ship in reusable containers. And so they don't have boxes. The containers go back to the, in this case, distribution center, but I'm picturing it from distribution and manufacturer. So if you've got the same distributors, you can have, reusable big containers. Manufacturers of furniture that are really focused on sustainability oftentimes will ship to commercial brand furniture, will ship to distribution warehouses and job sites with blanket wrap shipping. And then the truck driver just takes the blankets back. And so there's no packaging waste, because again, this packaging waste originated as an input over here, and their packaging waste eliminated over here. So you're always going back, and you're finding ways to repurpose it or reuse it. And if all else fails, recycle it. I should have a t-shirt that says that, if all else fails, recycle. And so one thing that waste reduction will do is it does improve your overall production. I'm not going to go through those in the interest of time, but now that you have drawn this out, you are going to make a preliminary target list. And these are going to be things that you think you can do. Now, there's a rules to the target list. You can only accomplish 3 to 4 at a time. So you can only have a list of things you want to work on that is 4 items long. So if you want to get rid of packaging waste, if you want to source one of your materials as renewable or something like that, then these are the types of things that you can work on. 4 max in that. And you must be able to show an ROI initially. So you must be able to cost that out. So in this case, how many dumpsters can you now not pay for? If you reduce your packaging, and you've got to have a number to that. Okay. And so efficiency first, always, and then reduction, but efficiency and elimination first. Okay. All right. So we're going to cover one tool quickly, so you at least have one more tool. I got 6 minutes. So now that you have your target, let's say you're getting to 0 waste. Although I don't really like that 0 connotation, but you ultimately want to get to 0 waste. So what's the first thing you have to do? You have to reduce your waste by 25%. And then you've got to reduce your waste by 50%, right? You just can't go right to 0 waste. So we need a better, and an ultimate target, ultimate being 0 waste. Now, when we look at sketching out this whole life cycle, now we're going to break it down to this little area, and then we'll break it down even more. So now we are going to, sorry, I'm going to skip ahead because this is all part of the masterclass. process mapping. Okay, so now we need to define the boundaries, we need to gather the data, and we need to find the work steps. What does that all mean? So in defining the boundaries, we're going to take a piece of manufacturing, and then we are going to understand the processes. We're going to identify everything that's involved. And then this is going to be the first level if you were to walk the manufacturing floor. Essentially, that's what we're going to draw. So first we drew out the supply chain. And if you don't manufacture, let's say you're a distributor, same thing. You can be walking the warehouse. How are materials being received? How are they, this all does apply. And you'll see my example, although I do it from a manufacturing perspective, it also could be a distributor that we talk about. And here's the example. So in the polypropylene yarn, we receive the materials, we check them in, we place them in stock, we move them to production. Then they're loaded onto a spool, they're threaded into the weaving machine, they're butt punched into the backing, the carpet tiles are cut, they're loaded on a pallet, and they're staged for shipping. If I were to, I'm so sorry, follow this yarn around the manufacturing facility, these are the steps, high level steps that I would see, okay? So now we're gonna look at the second level. And in the second level, we're gonna ask what happens at each stage. So when we receive the materials, okay, receive them, we check them in. We could have steps under that, but in this example, we're not going to. We check in the materials for staging, we place them in stock, and we move them to production. So checking in the materials and stage them, what does that involve? So that's got steps under it. So the second level steps in this process are the work steps. They're the things that happen. Why is that important? Because the KPIs are here. And they've got a name and they've got a job. And that person is now going to be responsible for eliminating that waste. So if our big target is 25% waste reduction, then the person whose job it is here is actually going to perform that reduction. And let me show you how. So now we're going to gather data about the process, the participants, the sequence, understand what's happening, interview, observe, a good person to talk to, be the maintenance person, and figure out what happens. And then we'll go through the work step, talk to the managers. And so from those work steps, I'm going to show you it all filled in. Then some of those work steps have outputs. And in the yellow is going to be the outputs. What are the outputs? Waste. So the first level is the process, the high level process that's happening. The second level is the work step. And the third level is what we're eliminating. That's the waste. And so what does that look like? In this case, it looks like this. So when we check in the materials, we unload the container, we open the cartons for storage, we remove excess packaging, and we place the spool on a pallet. Now, when we remove the excess packaging, we put metal straps into recycle, we put the filler to waste, and the plastic wrap to recycle. So ding, 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 ding. This is what we need to handle. And this is the person that's doing it. So when we're looking at our target, we're examining this specific work step. And we found that work step by first drawing the map and then bringing it in and figuring out what it was on that map that was a hot spot. And then we drew out that part of the map that had the hot spot so that we could find exactly the person who's going to make that target a reality. And, you could have second level, but they typically have multiple steps, so those don't count. And then you keep mapping and what goes on after that and where does it go and all of that. So process mapping creates job level actions. And I'm going to stop it there for any questions because we're at an hour. That was a fast hour. Question? So in wrapping this up, when you're looking at your supply chain, when you're looking at operations and sourcing and procurement, what you're essentially doing is you need to create yourself a map. First, a high level one. Then once you identify where it is that you have hotspots, you can then take that piece and say, okay, that page out of the book, I now want to put over here, and I want to examine that a little more. And I want to find exactly where, if packaging is a big output for us, or you could do the same thing with, as we said, fleet optimization, or you identify that fleet optimization is a hotspot, then guess what you're doing? You're now creating a fleet optimization plan as opposed to a waste plan. I mean, it just, depending on your focus, these tools work for any industry and any job description. I can make these tools work for because they're flexible. You just have to have your inputs and your outputs. So thank you. Is there a financial justification to reduce by 50% in a manufacturing sense? Absolutely. If you can reduce your efficiency targets and become efficient enough that you have a 50% reduction, let's say waste. Okay, dumpsters being one. How often do you fill a dumpster? I had a manufacturer go from a dumpster pickup every week to a dumpster pickup once a month and saved like $3,000 a month. Over 12 months, they just saved, $40-some thousand. No, $36,000. Let me do the math there. So yes, it is definitely that's why efficiency is what you work on first. Well, I hope you learned something.
Do we have any other questions?
Where are the easy wins? Efficiency. Efficiency is always an easy win. You draw out your map and you can figure out where your low-hanging fruit is, your easy win. You'll have some. Every organization does, even organizations who claim to be very lean, you can always find easy targets. But it's always going to be in savings in the beginning. Save energy, save water, save something. Better demand planning, save everything. But you'll find an easy win in efficiency.
I think we do not have any other questions now.
Okay. Thank you.
So
Okay.
as some of the questions which were asked have been answered, so it's time to end this webinar. Thank you, Dennis, for this amazing presentation. Thank you all for joining us this webinar, and I hope you found this the shared information useful and insightful. Remember to apply the knowledge gained in your work and share it with others. The webinar recording will be shared with you and uploaded to our YouTube channel in next few days. Don't forget to check out the website for the more resources and upcoming events. Thank you so much and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.